Okay, let's get started. Thank you everyone for joining us today. I am going to allow our panelists to go ahead and introduce themselves, and then we will dive right into the questions. If you have questions for any of the panelists, please go ahead and put them in the chat box or send them to me directly. So with that, I will allow Dr. Hudspeth to introduce herself first.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our COVID-19 pediatric vaccine town hall. So we've been hearing several questions and have received some of those, so we thought it would be a good idea to have this open forum to address any questions that you might have, as well as share a little bit about some of the work that we've been doing and seeing in terms of the pediatric COVID-19 vaccine. So as Rosa said, my name is Brooke Hudspeth, and I am a faculty member here at the College of Pharmacy at UK in our Pharmacy Practice and Science Department. And I also serve as our Chief Practice Officer. So I have had the wonderful opportunity to work in this role in collaboration with many of our pharmacy and other healthcare partners in the vaccine rollout, starting last fall, actually, with an effort with getting all of our campus community vaccinated against influenza. And as that has rolled on into COVID-19 and all of the increased needs that we've seen both here in Lexington locally, as well as throughout the Commonwealth of Kentucky, and really just working with, again, our pharmacy partners as they've rolled out these efforts. And so most recently, I have had the opportunity to participate in our pediatric vaccine clinic work group here at UK HealthCare. So we'll share a little bit of information too about some of those details and how you can have that access for children in the area to receive their vaccines. So thanks again. And with that, I'll turn it back over for other introductions. Dr. Kuhn, you go next.
Dr. Kuhn, we can't hear you.
My bad. My name is Bob Kuhn, and I am a pediatric pharmacist and faculty member in Pharmacy Practice and Science, and also cross-appointed in the Department of Pediatrics. I've worked at the Kentucky Children's Hospital for 36 years, and counting my residency, been helping take care of kids for 39 years. It is with great joy that we have a vaccine for children 5 to 11, and we're going to talk more about it as we move on. But along with my colleague, Dr. Elizabeth Autry, we've been helping shape some of the vaccine issues and what we have available in Kentucky for our children. And I think it's just a wonderful, fantastic opportunity that we want as many parents, grandparents to help get their children or grandchildren immunized. So we'll talk more about that. So maybe Vince, would you like to go next?
Sure. My name is Vince Venditto. I'm faculty in the College of Pharmacy, Pharmaceutical Sciences, and my background's in vaccine design. So obviously over the past year, I've had a lot of opportunities to talk about vaccines, and certainly fascinated by the progress that we've made, and bringing this to now into children is really exciting. So I'm happy to discuss more about the science behind vaccine development and yeah, answering all of your questions. And so I guess Elizabeth.
Yeah, my name is Elizabeth Autry. I'm one of the pediatric pharmacists here at Kentucky Children's Hospital with an emphasis in pulmonary allergy and immunology. And as Dr. Kuhn mentioned, really led the charge with a lot of our COVID initiatives, both in patient management as well as our monoclonal antibody clinic and the post-COVID complication of MIS-C and leading a task force for that. So certainly excited to be here today to help answer any questions.
Okay, thank you all for that. So we will just jump right into our first question, which I will have Dr. Kuhn address. And that is, why should my child receive the COVID-19 vaccine?
I guess I would almost ask the question, why shouldn't your child get the COVID vaccine? But certainly this is a very effective vaccine. that's been developed in the last few months at the dose that gives us a good response to these children with minimal side effects. All the data shows it to be very effective and as safe as adults, if perhaps even safer. It really gives the opportunity for our children to sort of think about what can be different, okay? I want everyone just to take a minute and think about your holiday celebration last year. Whether that was Christmas or Hanukkah or Kwanzaa or a New Year's celebration, or maybe a niece got married or didn't get married and the wedding party went down from 150 to 15. So think about what that was like and think what it can be like in 2021. If you think about these children now 5 to 11 who now are eligible for the vaccine, and I guess I'll be proud to say my grandchildren received theirs on Sunday. So we're counting down 17 more days before they can get their booster. And then if you think somewhere between 7 to 14 days after that, they would be fully at full response. That puts so many families to have holiday celebrations in a much more normal way, as long as the adults have been vaccinated as well. So this is an opportunity. In addition, think about what we might be able to change in the spring semester relative to school, relative to outings, all the things that we could not do in 2020. Hopefully we can do as the end of 2021 and the spring of 2022 comes along. So this gives that. In addition, our children, we love them and we hug them and we do all kinds of things. And sometimes they can pick up a virus and not be so sick and spread it to someone else. So this gives us another opportunity to protect perhaps grandma or grandpa or someone who's getting cancer chemotherapy that they're very close to and maybe unwillingly a carrier of COVID because they'd be asymptomatic. So it really rounds out. And so I hope you can see that child smiling and everyone doting on them, because we hope that's exactly what your holiday celebration can be like if we can move forward with this vaccine.
Thank you for that, Dr. Kuhn. So the next question is for Dr. Hudspeth. Which of the COVID-19 vaccines should my child receive?
Yeah, so I think too, Vince is, like you mentioned, has the science behind the different vaccines that are available. And so I think he'll go into a little bit more depth about that. But specifically for children, there are several vaccines that are available. Like I said, Vince will talk a little bit about that. But specifically for children, especially as we're thinking about those that are 5 to 11, and then we kind of think of another category of children that are 12 to 17, and then 18 and older is kind of how we lumped those available vaccines as far as their authorization. And so the Pfizer vaccine is a vaccine that is available and that has received that authorization for those children that are 5 to 11 years old. And then we kind of have the child and adolescent stage and grouping, which is 12 to 17. And again, those are the Pfizer vaccines that have been authorized for use currently in that age group. I do want to note, though, especially as we've had the recent changes and recent authorization for those children that are 5 to 11, the dose in that age group is 1/3 of the dose of what is seen in 12 and above in those older age groups. So that's important to note and to think about too. The vaccine sites where you take your children are very well aware. Vaccine safety is something that's very important. So that's something that's important to note. And I'll also mention too, Nicole, I know you mentioned it in the chat earlier, but regarding the needle size, and Dr. Kuhn had kind of joked about that when we had the first kind of screenshot up. So I will say that, especially in those younger patient populations, the vaccine, it goes in the same place. So it's intramuscular, so it goes into a muscle. Most often, the deltoid muscle on the arm is where that vaccine is administered. So if you think about, in a younger child, typically there's less of that muscle mass. So the needles are actually shorter in that patient subgroup. And so that's something else to keep in mind. I know, and we'll get into it a little bit too, some of the barriers or fears with younger children and needles. But that's something too that I wanted to point out, that those needles are smaller and still deliver the dose effectively. But something else that we can think of when we think about administration to this particular age group.
And Brooke, if I could just dovetail on that for everyone. If you saw that initial picture that Rosa put up for us, which was a wonderful picture, God, we do not use a syringe that big and a needle that big. All these things you see on TV, I don't know if they're staged or whatever. So the dose, the actual volume is 0.2 mLs. So that is typically the standard immunizations we give children when they're young. It's a half a mil, 0.5. It's a very small amount. In fact, they probably use that volume just so there'd be enough. So what you actually injected, it's in within a second, okay? When you push the plunger down. So it's much smaller. And I don't know about you, Brooke, but that picture where the child's actually looking at their arm when they get the vaccine, that's a pretty rare event. Certainly we can use distraction and stuff. So I don't want people to be fearful of that. In fact, watch the evening news and see all these pictures of these big syringes they're using. But when they're actually given the vaccine, you see a much smaller syringe. And we use the same size needle we would use in someone who got the measles vaccine or their pneumococcal vaccine when they're 6 months old. So this is as painless as we possibly can make it. But so we call it a little poke instead of a shot. So that's kind of the nomenclature we hope to kind of alleviate people's fear. So please don't think that syringe you saw early is anything we would use on your child.
So Dr. Kuhn, another question for you. If my child is 11, turning 12 in between doses, what should I do?
Well, after you buy a birthday present, okay, the first thing, so we would give at 11, we would give this dose of 10 mics, okay? So that would be the 0.2. When they turn 12, the current recommendation from the CDC is to go ahead and use the full dose 30 microgram or what we use in those over 11, okay? So that's by convention right now, and that's the best we know. So the pharmacist or other healthcare professional will do that. So they may get it from the orange vial when they're 11. They will get it from the purple top vial when they're 12.
Great. So is it safe for my child to take the vaccine if he or she had COVID or were potentially exposed? And if that's the case, how long afterwards should I wait?
So that's a good question, and one that we've heard, do I need the vaccine or does my child need the vaccine if they've had COVID or if they're exposed? So the recommendations are the same that we would tell, anyone. We've gotten these questions before. I've had COVID. What do I do? So the recommendations are that these patients need the vaccine. We know the immunity from these vaccines is more predictable than from having the infection itself. And so it's still recommended that even if you've tested positive in the past, that you still get the vaccine. So the current recommendations that we've been providing are to say once your child is out of that isolation period, or if they've been exposed and they are in a quarantine period, upon completion of that period, the child is okay to come on in and get their vaccine.
And Brooke, just maybe if we could just dovetail on that, I think it's also important for people to understand that we have faced COVID in our children's hospital and have over the last year and a half, a number of patients. Elizabeth Autry Elizabeth's right on top of this. And so she might be able to give us a little heads up about really what we face. Now, remember, we have children coming into the hospital with COVID who are only 300 yards from the College of Pharmacy. So we have those services. So I wonder, Elizabeth, would you mind sort of giving us an update on sort of how many patients we've seen and sort of different categories, for a minute or two, just so people have a sense of what we're doing here, right here in Central Kentucky.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Dr. Kuhn. I did check with our numbers just this morning to kind of confirm, since the pandemic started, how many pediatric patients have been admitted to Kentucky Children's Hospital with severe or critical COVID infection requiring drug therapy, whether that's remdesivir and now baricitinib, dexamethasone. And we're up to approaching 50 patients that have come through since the pandemic started. And if you've seen anything on the news with Dr. Sean Mattag, our infectious disease provider, really the majority of that has been since the Delta variant has become a reality with the surge that we've seen in the Children's Hospital. And just looking at our demographics of what's come through, these have all been high-risk patients, obesity being that driving factor, and the majority being unvaccinated that would be eligible for a vaccine. Of course, we've had some that have trickled through that were not old enough at the time for a vaccine, but again, the large majority were 12 and older and vaccine eligible. So this is a great tool that's now in our arsenal to help fight this pandemic.
So let's dive into the current status of COVID-19 vaccine research in children and adolescents. Can you all talk about what that looks like right now?
Well, I'll start and people can add. Now think about this as in any drug development, typically you test it in adults and see what data you have there. And then we started these studies a few months ago in children. So Pfizer being the first one with output and now emergency use authorization. It was tested in a number of children in 5 different countries. And so since children with COVID or children in general who have COVID, it's relatively less common than the adults. And so therefore, it wasn't so much the initial trials looking at who developed COVID, that did their antibody response, the measured in their blood, the amount of antibody they needed a limit or meet a threshold that we all thought would protect them. And what's fascinating about the 5 and 11-year-old data that was released, that 99.2% of all those immunized in those 5 countries had a response that is, we think, is more than sufficient to protect them against COVID. 99.2, that's a pretty strong number, okay, which was as great, if not greater than the adult studies. So this 10 microgram dose really is quite effective, okay? I think many of you read in the newspaper this morning that we're approaching 1 million vaccinations in children already. Since most pharmacies and places didn't get their vaccine until Sunday, that's a pretty remarkable event. So we are moving forward on that. So in 5 to 11, we have emergency use authorization with Pfizer and Moderna is working on their data to submit. There are clinical trials going on now with 2 to 5-year-olds, okay? None of that data has been released, it's ongoing. I'm not aware of children less than 2 at this point. Maybe there are some studies that are being started. So the idea is we want to continue to see the safety and the efficacy of vaccines as we move farther down the age group. So far, the signals are very, very strong for good safety. Okay, now, in addition, the studies, there have been follow-up studies to follow these children who got the vaccine, this 5 to 11, and then of course the 12 and above. How is it done? How many of those children have developed COVID or severe COVID, as Dr. Autry talked about? And the data continues to show it's very effective, okay? So we are learning, of course, we don't have 2-year data, we don't have 3-year data, we have several months data on these children, okay? So we continue to look at this. In addition, there's a number of groups in children's hospitals looking at this myocarditis that has been shown in some of the second dose for the older, typically males or boys in their teenage years or preteen years. So those are things that they're following as well. But I can tell you that the research continues, and it will be updated in 2 weeks and 2 weeks after that. So it's a continuing thing. But all the data, and for someone who's dealt with children for almost 40 years, the data, the safety data continues to be strong. And so we want parents and grandparents and nieces and nephews and everyone to understand that this is a safe vaccine. That does not mean something could happen down the road, but we're continuing to look at that. And now that we have a system, and Brooke, correct me if I'm wrong, it's the first time we've really had a national system where the data is entered every day by the providers or at the end of the day. So we get updates every day on number of vaccines and then of course, any kind of serious adverse reactions. So it's ongoing, but so far the signals continue to be very strong. And I'll let others add to that.
Yeah, I'll add just briefly, taking a little bit of a wider view here and what we're looking at going forward. I know that we're focused mostly on children's vaccines right now, but I think if we consider for children and adults, the coronavirus SARS-CoV-2 is unlikely to go away. I think we're going to be living with this for the foreseeable future. So, vaccines are going to be critical as we go forward, and continuing to monitor the safety and efficacy of the vaccines going forward. So as it has been indicated, Pfizer is approved for 5 and older. We continue to look, or the pharmaceutical companies continue to look at younger populations for Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson to make sure that we can get enough coverage across all age groups. The other thing that we're looking at, because as I indicated, the virus is likely not going away. So what is the frequency of booster shots? How often will we need booster shots? So right now, there's really compelling data that's coming out for the efficacy of booster shots and how they're limiting symptomatic infection, hospitalization, and death. And so, based on all of those accounts, it's likely that we're going to be needing boosters going into the future. The frequency of those boosters is unclear, but if you think about this kind of like a flu vaccine where you get a flu shot every year, it may be on the same type of schedule where we're going to be needing a coronavirus vaccine every year. But obviously, more research and data needs to be collected to actually figure out what that looks like going forward.
So another question that we had is, I have heard that COVID vaccine can cause myocarditis, and Dr. Kuhn, you spoke about that a little bit, but can you talk about what myocarditis is and why you shouldn't be worried, or what signs to look for?
Sure. Myocarditis, of course, is that inflammation of the heart for the myocardium, the heart. And there's also an associated thing called pericarditis, which is the pericardial sac around the heart. Okay. And we know that viruses can trigger illness, can trigger myocarditis and pericarditis, not just SARS-CoV-2, okay, or anything. So we know that in boys, typically adolescent boys, after their second shot, they tend to be a little more at risk for this myocarditis. Chest pain, shortness of breath, maybe palpitations, they feel the heart being a little bit different. Those are kind of scary signs, admittedly, but those are the signs of myocarditis. Now, and Elizabeth may correct me if I'm wrong, but one of our pediatric cardiologists here is part of a working group nationally looking at all the reported cases of myocarditis in children secondary to COVID, or at least COVID vaccination, as we know. And so they've looked at it, and in all the cases that they've examined across the country, it's been, if properly treated, the children have done very well, and it's much less of an issue than the severe COVID ramifications that Dr. Autry alluded to. 50 children, okay, nearly 50 children have been severely ill, requiring treatment, okay? The number of cases of myocarditis would be very, very small compared to that. So Elizabeth, correct me if I'm wrong, so far everyone has, or the vast majority of patients have recovered from their myocarditis and pericarditis from that working group.
Yeah, we actually had a pediatric town hall for the Department of Pediatrics not too terribly long ago, when some of those initial reports of myocarditis were coming out. And we certainly had a handful that came through Kentucky Children's Hospital, and they were really all mild in nature and recovered. And kind of talking with our cardiologist colleagues, infectious disease, really the risk of myocarditis is higher with an acute COVID-19 infection or the post-COVID complication of multisystem inflammatory syndrome in children. So really from the vaccine risk standpoint, it really is at a minimum. And I think with that signal that was being seen, the FDA took that seriously and has really expanded patient numbers in these trials just to make sure we're not missing maybe an incidence of this being linked to the vaccine more frequently than maybe expected.
And Elizabeth makes a strong point that even viruses themselves, viral myocarditis we talk about, it's a common thing. So you have to back that out, but we've seen that increase more in adolescent boys. So, but again, it's mild, appropriately treated, and of course, the Kentucky Children's Hospital and the children's hospitals across the country are more than happy to take care of those children. And with pediatric cardiology and follow-up, these children so far are doing well. So it is something we're looking for. And as Elizabeth said, this is how the system works. When you have thousands and tens of thousands of patients getting these vaccines every day, if there's a signal, it'll start to pop.
So, and I want to point out that, while we're still collecting data with all the children that are being vaccinated now, the data that was used for the FDA approval process for 5 to 11-year-olds included around 3,100 5 to 11-year-olds, and there were no significant adverse side effects reported, including myocarditis and multisystem inflammatory syndrome. So the side effects that they did see are really, the sore arm, the things that you expect to have when you get a vaccine, the same thing that we get that adults get when we have vaccines.
That's a good point. Really, this myocarditis is typically seen in the adolescent male. Okay, so you're right. And obviously more and more children are getting this, so we'll see. So I mean, I think that's all we know right now, but I personally, I think it's going to be a really very small problem, if any at all.
Do we need to worry about an increase in MIS-C in kids receiving the COVID-19 vaccine?
I think we should let Elizabeth answer that one.
Yes, certainly. No, we should not anticipate any kind of increased risk of MIS-C post COVID-19 vaccine. There's been some kind of letters to the editor and different things that have circulated, but there doesn't seem to be any kind of correlation with receipt of the vaccine and developing this multisystem inflammatory syndrome in children that I'm aware of or have appreciated with what has come through our children's hospital.
So Elizabeth, how many MIS-C children have we treated so far? No, you know
yeah, about 34 35 have come through. With the first wave of the pandemic, we started treating these patients in October of 2020. And we have kind of tapered off. They're spacing out. So there might be something with the Delta variant and MIS-C that there's that less potential. But we're certainly learning and evolving as more and more information comes out. And these patients have done well once early identified and treatment. We've only had one really severe case that required life support.
Currently, is it safe for pregnant or lactating women to receive the COVID-19 vaccine?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer this one, and kind of just going off of what Dr. Kuhn had mentioned earlier about the safety and underscoring the safety with COVID-19 vaccine in general. And so I think what we're seeing more and more, and what we have specifically seen in pregnant patients is patients being enrolled in something called a Be Safe program, or Be Safe specifically, and to your question, Marissa, for pregnant patients, where these patients are monitored after receiving the vaccine, and they are actually monitored and called once per trimester, and then once the infant is 3 months old, to monitor for safety in these patients. Because again, like children, when we think about the vaccine approval process, I think there were a lot of questions at the beginning from pregnant patients regarding the safety. And so what has been seen, I believe 30,000 plus patients, pregnancies have been reported to that Be Safe monitoring program. And it was found that the vaccine is safe in those individuals. And actually the benefit outweighs the risk of anything that we might see from the vaccine itself. And if we think about the benefit in these patients and the complications that could ensue from having the virus itself, we know that the vaccine is recommended for these patients. And so there have been updates and guidance from the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, ACOG, to recommend the vaccine in pregnant and lactating women, that it should be given in these patients.
Since I'm the basic scientist on the panel, I'll add a little bit of some of the science and our understanding of the immune system in pregnant women, which I think is important here. So our immune systems are really designed to distinguish between self and non-self. This is what I always teach our pharmacy students in the second year. So they're really designed to recognize self from non-self. So when you're pregnant, it is possible that your baby could be recognized as non-self because it's something that's in your body that is not normally there. And so that the immune system during pregnancy is really designed to diminish its activity. So during pregnancy, you are at increased risk for infections and some different complications because of your weakened immune system associated with the pregnancy. So this is even more reason to get vaccinated when you're pregnant because of the complications that are associated with infection, and particularly with COVID-19. And we know that women who are pregnant and infected, they do have increased complications. And it's certainly possible to transmit the virus to the child. So there are fetuses that are infected that then the child is born with infection. So which can have significant implications for long-term complications in the child.
Vince, you make a good point. And the other part too is that a number of women high risk of pregnancies can be in big trouble, especially as their physiology, their weight, and some of the other things change. So supporting them if they do have severe COVID with ventilatory support and that kind of stuff becomes very, very difficult. And there have been a number of women who've not made it because of the complications near term from COVID. So another excellent reason to get them vaccinated. I love that's how I teach it too, Vince. That's great.
And we had a follow-up question about a booster shot when pregnant. Is it okay to go ahead and get your booster?
So I would say yes. I'm not the clinician, but the booster is really recommended right now for anybody who's immune compromised or in high risk situations. And so I think it really is important to talk to your physician, your gynecologist, obstetrician, to figure out what the most appropriate route is for you. But I think in most cases, it would be recommended to get the booster.
It's my understanding that's true. I would concur with Vince, but I think 99.5% of the time they would say yes. So, I mean, given what Vince talked about, just think of how that booster out. And we're getting to that point now where people have gotten their primary series, and now they're a number of months out, starting a family, getting pregnant. So this is a good question.
Yeah, and I'll just agree with that as well. That is recommended for those patients.
There's also a comment in the chat that the inter-COVID study just published results with increased risk of preeclampsia due to COVID on top of the respiratory complications. So I think that's important to note.
So is there currently any evidence that the COVID-19 vaccine affects fertility or puberty?
No. Is that enough?
Does anyone want to elaborate on that?
No. I mean, I don't think there's any data. And if you think about it, now that with so many women who are pregnant or getting vaccinated, we're starting to see the children, the infants and stuff. So I don't know of any data. There were animal studies done and showed no changes in the animals' reproductive issues or anything like that. So obviously that's the toxicology thing you do prior to doing immunizing anybody or giving anybody a drug. So I don't know of any data, and I don't know where that came from. So I just really that's over the left field foul pole for me.
So I think that it, you know, part of this is right. You're looking at the effects on infertility and which certainly is there a non-zero chance that this could happen in the future? I mean, I presume so, right? But if you think about the science of what's happening here, we have a lipid particle that has the mRNA, and that is what's composed. That's what the vaccine is made of. That is injected, and we know that those components are around for at most a week. And it's really the immune response to that is providing that protection. So, you know, it's unlikely that low dose and its persistence in the body for less than a week. Really what happens is it's taken into the cell, it's used, and then immediately degraded. So you're not going to see long-term effects of the vaccine. It's really your immune response to the vaccine that's protecting you from the virus. And you know, our immune systems are designed to protect us from invading pathogens without attacking our own bodies or affecting our own fertility. That would be evolutionarily unwise. And so it only makes sense that the vaccine will not have long-term consequences on fertility. But obviously, you know, we're 2 years into this. We're a year into to vaccinations, and so we need to collect more data to figure this out. But it's highly unlikely that it's going to have any effect. And the last thing I'll say is the effects of COVID. I think in every question I could say this answer, whether it's respiratory complications or, you know, in pregnancy or the SARS-CoV-2, the virus that leads to COVID, is going to have more consequences, long-term consequences and negative consequences than any effect of the vaccine. And so all of the clinical trials have shown this, and anytime the FDA is considering approval of a vaccine or a drug, what they are considering is, does the benefit of this therapy or vaccine outweigh the risk of not having it? And in every case, the vaccine has outweighed the risk of the virus. And so that's why the FDA is approving the vaccines. And so, based on all of that, the vaccine is safe and effective and, you know, should be considered without being too concerned of the risk and the long-term consequences.
Well said. And think about, we're now focusing on children 5 to 11, and this is something we really want to allow them to get back and stay in school and have activities and do the kind of mental health issues and the kinds of development things. And heard from many educators where, you know, Johnny was a 5th grader, was out of school, and now he's a 7th grader, and adjusting to being a 7th grader is quite a bit different than what you do as a 5th grader. So there are a lot of children who are struggling with some of those issues, with some of the social issues and behavioral issues. And so this vaccine gives us an additional way to help protect now kindergarten basically through high school and on into adulthood. So it's really going to be a game changer for our schools as we build into this vaccine.
So talking about adolescents for a second, should I give a 12 to 17-year-old who is immunocompromised an additional dose of the COVID-19 vaccine after they complete their primary series?
So the answer to that is yes. So, you know, similar to what we see with the immunocompromised population and the requirement for a 3rd dose, that is also the recommendation in those that are 12 to 17. So receiving a 3rd dose of the Pfizer for 12 to 17 or Moderna for those greater than 28 days after their first mRNA or their first 2 vaccines that they've received of each of those.
I would just add, with my role being the immunology pharmacist as well for our pediatric patients, Those that have an underlying immunodeficiency that are on replacement therapy, we have given them their booster dose after completing the primary series.
And I would even add, Elizabeth, if you want to comment on, so if you have high risk children or children at high risk, there's the monoclonal antibody approach as well. So Elizabeth has kind of championed that clinic, and one of two in the state. So would you maybe just share with the audience what opportunity, if there needs to be, you guys could offer?
Yes, certainly. At Kentucky Children's Hospital, we do have a pediatric infusion clinic that's designed specifically to administer monoclonal antibodies to those high-risk pediatric patients that meet the emergency use authorization that's outlined by the FDA. Right now, it's 12 and older, at least 40 kilos, and having at least one high-risk criteria, whether it's pursuing treatment because they have an actual active infection for SARS-CoV-2, or maybe it's that high-risk patient that might not mount an immune response. They're in between vaccine series, they haven't been vaccinated. That would be at high risk for progressing to severe COVID infection, can receive it as a post-exposure prophylaxis indication. We have the ability at our clinic here, like Dr. Kuhn mentioned, one of two in the state, with really ours being kind of touted as the primary referral center for children of Kentucky. We could have throughput of up to 26 patients a day, running, in the evening hours from 3 to 9 p.m. Monday through Friday. And it's a tool for parents to advocate for this for their child, but also for the primary care providers. We've had numerous town halls and flyers circulating in which we can advertise for this monoclonal antibody. Specifically, we're using casirivimab and endivimab, or the Regeneron product, for our treatment and post-exposure prophylaxis. And we've had actually 14 referrals. We're doing both internal and external referrals, and we've given it to 12 patients that have all done beautifully with no adverse reactions, with IV being our preferred route of administration. And I don't think I've ever seen a clinic come together so quickly as it did to serve the children of Kentucky as it did here at UK HealthCare.
So I have another question from the TAD. If my child is vaccinated, can they stop wearing a mask?
At present, the mitigation strategy should still remain in place for both adults and children. I'm not aware of anything. Could we down the road be able to do that if we get 24 of the 28 million children vaccinated and continue? So right now, we need to maintain mask wearing. And as the schools look at things down the road and we get more and more children vaccinated, perhaps that's a point of discussion. But currently, we need to wear those masks.
I think the one thing that's important here is that the vaccines largely are being tested to prevent symptomatic infection, prevent hospitalization, prevent death, and that's for all ages. And one thing that we're not testing is whether or not you can still be infected and whether or not you can still transmit. And until we have very clear evidence that if you're vaccinated, you cannot transmit, then that's when I think we're going to have very clear indication that we can take masks off. Getting vaccinated is protecting you as an individual. It's protecting your child. The mask is really preventing you from spreading virus to other people and certainly limiting transmission. So until we have more information, I think it is wise to keep masks on, at least in indoors with other people, especially if you don't know their vaccination status.
And one more question. Is it your belief that the vaccine will be a requirement for school-aged children in the future?
Who wants to be a politician? I think this.
If you make a good point. This is going to be around for a while. Okay, it's a deadly virus, kills people. All right. It would meet all the requirements of the routine childhood immunization strategies, okay? Because immunizations are a strategy. How do we prevent a communicable disease from spreading in a population, okay? So I'm not a politician, Vince, but I'll just simply say it would not surprise me at all. And it will be something that we will have to address. But I think the most important thing now is that as many children, as much of the population of the United States gets vaccinated, the more likely we will be having less of a problem with COVID. But I agree with Vince. I think we will see a booster or an annual or every 2 years, whatever it turns out to be, we will probably have to continue to boost that effect. And if you think about it, the traditional pediatric vaccine modality is to give a primary sequence or primary series, and then to boost the child or boost the individual a few years later. Traditionally now we do it in the first year of life, and then we boost them just before they go to preschool at 4 to 6 years of age. So, you know, I'm not sure that's the strategy we'll use, but I think we should. And I mean, it's a wonderful thing if you think about it, that we have a highly effective vaccines, and more than we develop. Some of them may even be better. So I think we really have to just assume that there will be some kind of booster, there will be some kind of annual or biannual or something vaccine, and we'll just have to find that out. But one thing we can say for sure, children for the most part, once they're even 2 years of age, have a very strong immune response. And most of them are very, very healthy, okay? They get ear infections and sore throats and break their arms at a soccer game. They don't have too many other coexisting conditions that makes, fighting off an infection harder for some of us older people who have underlying diseases.
Well, I want to,
Go ahead.
yep, if you don't mind. I just want to add to that, right? So, you know, if we take politics out of it, from a scientific standpoint, vaccines are the second most effective healthcare intervention strategy to reduce death and long-term health consequences, second only to clean water. And vaccines are a relatively inexpensive strategy for public health. So from a public health perspective, it only makes sense that vaccines should be approved and mandated. And there's very few examples of where, or very, very few circumstances where vaccines should not be mandated, in my opinion. And I think that's certainly supported by science. I think the other reason for this is healthcare costs and the effect on the economy. If you are not vaccinating and people are getting sick and hospitalized, the strain on the healthcare system, the strain on the economy, right? The people who are getting sick and out of work and transmission rates. If we're simply spending however many dollars it costs to create a vaccine and put it in an arm, that actually saves several $1,000s in healthcare costs in people who are being hospitalized and put on ICU. So I think from both a public health perspective and a financial economic perspective, it only makes sense to mandate vaccines.
And finally, and I guess one just additional point is, if you think about it, this is exactly what we prayed for a year ago. Effective vaccine in children and older, and hopefully down even very young, that we could effectively stop or at least minimize the spread of COVID. And now we're getting effective treatments that are coming on board. We have monoclonal antibodies that can be given. So if you think about it, we have just some wonderful things, and it's paid for by the government. You know, it's free. And so we want to make sure our children have that opportunity. And I think that's what this town hall was about, was making sure that you all feel comfortable and hopefully can advocate for your either children, grandchildren, or friends and neighbors to help them understand what this is all about.
So Dr. Autry, I'm going to have you wrap us up as we're getting low on time by telling us about the process of signing up for the Peds Clinic vaccine. But there was also a related question about any educational tools that you all recommend to have younger children feel more comfortable when they're receiving the poke, or if it's possible for caregivers and children to receive their vaccine or booster at the same time.
Yeah, certainly happy to take this. I think with our vaccination clinic that we've gotten up and off the ground running at Fountain Court, we really leveraged those experts in pediatric medicine and really the child life experts to make this a very friendly process. I know they go on a, I think it's a, quest. They get stickers with each stopping point along the way, and I think a prize at the end. And it's really a state-of-the-art like vaccine facility that has really been designed to make it at ease for these pediatric patients when they're coming through that might be nervous for that poke that might be coming. And we're really allowing any and all pediatric patients to come through, and of course families as well at the Fountain Court location. And I know, I think it was added to the chat, the scheduling appointment, ukvaccine.org. And certainly there's been flyers circulating around about how to register. I think there's been quite the influx of volunteers that are wanting to help with this vaccine effort for pediatric patients. And I don't know specifics, but I've heard rumblings that we're maybe even trying to open up more appointments because of the big uptake of volunteers wanting to help with this initiative. So more than happy to answer any other questions. I'll add my email to the chat feature.
Yeah, and I'll just add to Elizabeth's comments there. I know many of you all in our college community have stepped up to volunteer in those efforts, in addition to all of our community partners. So I know we probably have people on here from other areas within Lexington and beyond. And so I also want to give, accolades to our community pharmacies and how they've stepped up and also administered vaccines throughout. And I know several have received, as Dr. Kuhn mentioned earlier, their vaccines for peds as well, starting this week. And so I know with a lot of our pharmacy friends out in the communities as well, that's another option. Whether it be through their personal websites or calling or just visiting those pharmacies. I know some pediatrician offices have also received vaccines and are conducting clinics in different ways as well, but I have seen a lot of the access for those that might need some additional touch points for those community pharmacies as well.
Yeah, I would echo that our pharmacists in the state have really stepped up. And I think the Commonwealth of Kentucky, so many of the pharmacists are involved in this, along with, the pediatricians and family practitioners. I think actually some of the pediatricians have availability, but they're also very, very busy. This is a very busy time for them. Children sick with other things, and we all know that, and some busy practices. So sometimes the pediatric clinic or pharmacy or whatever, you'll know your family, you'll know what's best for you. But I will say one thing, just since we all many of us are associated with the UK, you can park right next to the building if you go to the pediatric clinic on Fountain Square, okay? It's off-site, you can pull up close and in a separate building. And there also are special rooms for people with some sensory issues or children who really need kind of a quiet place with some distractions, again, with our child life people to really help them through that process.
Okay, so seeing no other questions, we will go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you to our panelists and thank you to everyone who joined us today. If you would like to share this recording with your friends and family, it will be available on the UKCOP YouTube account. Thanks again and have a good day.